Howdy, boys and girls. This is Mrs. Dunn,
And this is Miss Sarles.
and today we're going to be talking about ratios. So go ahead and in your INB, make sure that you put the title at the top, and let's talk about the definition. Pause to write this down so that you have it written. A ratio is a comparison of two quantities using division. So there are different ways that we can write ratios. There are three forms. We can write it in word form, a fraction form, and the ratio form. Again, go ahead and pause the video so that we can put this all down so that you have it, so you know the three ways that we can write a ratio. Okay, ratios are pretty easy to work through. The word form, if I'm comparing two things, 5 to 3, and I say it 5 to 3. Fraction form is the same numbers, we just use it over a fraction, so it's 5 over 3 or 5 to 3. We don't call this 5/3 because it isn't a number, it's still comparing two quantities. And the last way is the ratio form with these little dots in the middle of the colons. So those are just three ways that we write ratios. We see ratios in two different ways. We see them as a part to part or a part to whole. Another way of saying part to whole is total. So, some examples of that is in a classroom we have boys to girls. We can also have girls to boys. So, is boys to girls the same thing as girls to boys?
No, it is not the same thing. They are actually the inverse of each other.
Right, so if there were 5 boys in a class to 3 girls, we wouldn't want to call those girls boys or those boys girls. Order matters, so we need to make sure that we keep our parts together and that we order it correctly. When we go part to whole, we see examples like boys to the whole class, girls to the whole class. So we make sure that we find the total when we're doing that part. And again, we want to make sure that we're including just the girls or just the boys. Okay, so let's look at another type of example that we see. We often see, when we talk about sports, wins to losses. So we see the ratio of wins to losses, or losses to wins. Another way to write it, but it can be written differently. Another way using part to whole is wins to total, or losses to the total number of games. Okay. So again, order matters, so we want to make sure that we label our numbers. Let's look at an example that we have here. So our example is 13 games, 5 of them we won. So I'm going to start by talking about my wins to total. So Ms. Sarles, how many wins does it give me?
5. It tells you that there are 5 wins.
So we can say 5 to, and what would the total be?
There were 13 games played.
So my ratio is just 5 to 13. Now if I wanted to come over to my part to part, wins to losses, well, it gives me my wins. It says it's 5. But how do I figure out my losses? Are my losses 13?
Now, there were 13 games played and we won 5. So we would subtract 13 minus 5 to get 8 games lost.
Okay, so if I have 5 wins, that means I have 8 losses, so my ratio is 5 to 8. And we want to make sure that we add our two numbers together to get that total. So we should know that 8 plus 5 is 13, we're checking. I left a little bit of space here because I want to be able to write this in all 3 forms. I wrote it in the ratio form. What's another way I can write this, Ms. Sarles?
You can write it in the fraction form.
Okay, so I would write it as 5 over 8, which is different than 8 over 5.
Yes.
And what's another way I can write it?
You could use the word form.
Okay. So 5 to 8. All right. Now that we know the number of losses, if I wanted to figure out my ratio of losses to total, I can go back over here and do that because I know that now my losses are 8, thanks to Ms. Sarles for that. So we can say 8 to, and I'm going back to the total, which is 13. Okay, and help me out with this last one, Ms. Sarles. It's losses to wins.
Losses would be 8, and the wins are 5, so it's 8 to 5.
Okay, so 8 to 5, which is different from 5 to 8, and 8 to 5 as a fraction. Okay, the last little bit that we want to talk about when it comes to ratios is that they can be simplified or reduced. Remember, simplified and reduced mean the same thing. We can look at ratios almost like fractions. So when you see a ratio that has a top and a bottom number that can be simplified or reduced, we can also do that. So my example is 7 over 21, 7 to 21. What is a common factor that we see in 7 and 21?
7.
7. So if I'm going to rewrite my ratio, I'm going to do it by a factor of 7. So I can divide the top by 7 and the bottom by 7. 7 divided by 7
Is 1.
and 21 divided by 7.
Is 3.
So my ratio is brought down to 1 to 3. So 7 to 21 is equal to 1 to 3. Okay, hopefully that was not too much new information. We should already have a pretty basic understanding of what ratios are. Over on my other side of my notebook, I should be writing my whisk. Remember, our whisk is a statement, a sentence that tells me something that you learned about today, or a question that you have about something that we didn't clarify, or you can write a question that you would see like on a test. And then we have a check for understanding. It is one set of information, so we have 13 boys to 6 girls. I'm asking you to write the ratios all 3 ways. Remember, they're over here, the 3 forms of ratios. So I want to see boys to class, girls to boys, and girls to class. All right, I look forward to seeing that and us working together. Thank you.